The alien patrol laughed so loudly their armored bellies jiggled, and the sound echoed through the clearing like a badly tuned trumpet. One of them, a tall, scaly soldier with a single huge eye, bent his knees in a ridiculous crouch and wiggled forward on tiptoe, arms stretched out like some cartoon thief. The rest burst into even louder howls, slapping their knees, claws clattering against their metal greaves. They mimicked what they thought was human stealth, dragging their feet dramatically, whispering, "SHHH," in booming voices, until even their commander chuckled with that deep, rasping snort. The irony, of course, was that while they mocked, 3 humans were already less than 20 feet away, watching with patient silence from the shadows of their campfire light. The Soundless squad had entered the alien perimeter hours ago, and not one of the creatures had noticed. They crouched now, silent as statues, every muscle locked in a stillness that felt almost unnatural. In that moment the squad leader, Jonas Hale, allowed himself the faintest grin. He had seen comedy shows that were less entertaining than this. The galaxy's most advanced war species, armed with sensors that could detect a heartbeat at 100 meters, had reduced human stealth to a circus act. Jonas wanted to laugh, but laughter was forbidden. Instead, he pressed his tongue to the roof of his mouth and breathed out slow, the way the squad had trained for years. The aliens thought they understood humans. They thought loud mouths, clumsy shoes, and creaking staircases defined the species. But what they did not know was that a handful of humans had spent years mastering an art form so refined it bordered on the impossible. Silence was not just an absence of sound to the squad. It was a weapon, sharpened in dark forests, abandoned warehouses, and beneath ancient wooden floors that screamed at the faintest step. And here, in this alien camp filled with laughter and carelessness, silence was about to become their greatest humiliation. The commander of the alien patrol rose to his full height, a hulking figure with scales glistening under the moonlight. He smirked, scanning his soldiers who were still busy mocking humans with theatrical stumbles and tiptoe parades. He raised a clawed hand for attention and growled that if the humans were truly brave, they would try sneaking through his camp right now. His soldiers erupted again, one of them collapsing to the dirt in hysterics. They imagined humans crashing into pots, sneezing into bushes, falling flat on their faces. None of them imagined the reality, that the bet had already been lost before it was made. In the shadows, Jonas gave the faintest signal, a tap of his finger against the ground. 2 other squad members, Nadia and Rook, shifted their attention instantly, eyes tracking the commander's movements. Nadia had a wiry frame and eyes that glittered with the kind of focus that could cut steel. Rook, broad-shouldered and usually gruff, carried a look of bemused restraint as if holding back 1,000 sarcastic remarks. Jonas did not need to speak. The squad communicated in silence with gestures so subtle even a human eye might miss them. The irony was delicious. The aliens had turned their camp into a stage for mocking human frailty. The humans, in turn, had made the camp their theater, and they were the actors who could never be seen. The squad knew that victory was not measured in sound tonight but in patience. Every heartbeat mattered, every second stretched into a game of balance between humor and survival. For if one twig snapped, one breath slipped too fast, the aliens would be reminded that human stealth was no joke but rather a nightmare they had invited to dinner. Nadia shifted her weight, watching as an alien soldier tripped over his own tail while exaggerating a human stumble. The others roared with laughter, one pounding the ground with his claws. Jonas almost pitied them. Almost. Because in their arrogance, they had failed to realize that comedy sometimes ends in tragedy, and the punchline was waiting in the dark. There was history behind this moment, a weight that pressed against the squad's silence. Humans had been underestimated since first contact. Aliens marveled at human humor, baffled at their emotions, and scoffed at their seemingly fragile bodies. But the Soundless squad was born of that underestimation. They had been selected from dozens of candidates, chosen for their ability to adapt, to hide, to move like shadows in daylight. Their training was grueling. They learned to silence their footsteps on gravel, to hold in sneezes beneath clouds of dust, to breathe without stirring spiderwebs in abandoned attics. They trained not only the body but the mind, for silence is fragile, and one slip of the mind can break it louder than a scream. Now that training pressed against the moment, Jonas held his squad steady while the alien commander gloated. The commander's voice carried arrogance and humor as he boasted that humans could never match alien patrols, that their stealth was a laughable myth. His soldiers cheered, unaware that proof of the contrary sat like ghosts in the edges of their firelight. The hook of the night came suddenly. A clumsy alien, in an effort to exaggerate human sneaking, twisted his foot too far and yelped in pain. The camp erupted into chaos as his fellow soldiers mocked him instead, laughing harder than before. And as their laughter rose, 3 shadows passed silently through their ranks. Not one alien turned his head. Not one ear twitched. The humans moved like whispers on wind, carving through the camp as though invisible. Jonas could have ended it then. He could have slit a throat or disabled their weapons. But this was not the mission yet. The mission was patience, and patience meant letting the aliens laugh until laughter tasted bitter. So the squad glided deeper into the camp, brushing past tents, slipping under wires, weaving through patrols. The irony was unbearable. The aliens had no idea they were being watched, studied, and outwitted in real time. In the heart of the camp, Nadia froze. She spotted the alien commander standing with a strange device, something humming with power at his belt. She glanced at Jonas, eyes wide. He gave the faintest nod. Whatever that device was, it mattered. The squad would learn more before the night was through. But for now, they had already won the first battle. For while the aliens laughed at the very idea of human stealth, the Soundless squad had already walked straight through their camp without a whisper. And as Jonas crouched in the shadow of the commander's tent, watching the creatures still mock human frailty, he allowed himself a private thought, one that burned like fire behind his silence. If they thought this was funny, they were about to learn the human punchline. And it would echo far louder than their laughter ever could. They had always called it a squad as if that made them like any other unit in any other war. The truth was stranger. The Soundless squad was less a team and more a very specific question the world had asked itself. Could human beings learn to move in a way that broke the logic of noise? Could the physical world be negotiated without squeaks and rustles and breath sounds? The answer had been assembled over years out of stubborn practice, petty humiliations, and a ledger of tiny victories that looked like accidents to anyone not counting. Jonas Hale remembered the first time he met Nadia, when she stood still in a room with a fan rattling and a fluorescent bulb buzzing and somehow made those ordinary noises eclipse her. She had an ability to lean into the soundscape until she was part of it. Rook, on the other hand, was a storm held together by discipline, broad and heavy and somehow able to place his feet as if the floor were sensitive glass. Together they made silence feel like teamwork instead of a personal obsession. Recruitment was never flashy. There were no trumpets, no medals pinned to chests, no grand speeches about destiny. Jonas had been found at a volunteer search and rescue drill where he had navigated a collapsing building and emerged without dislodging so much as a loose screw. Nadia had been a stagehand in a failing theater where she repaired creaking sets at night by memorizing which boards protested and which accepted her weight like a friendly handshake. Rook had been the one nobody wanted on a demo team because he was built like a door, but he moved like one too, always in the right place and opening without a sound. There had been others who came and went, candidates who could crouch for hours but could not quiet their minds, athletes who could sprint silently but could not resist the urge to prove it. Those who remained shared something in their faces, a calm curiosity that made them look like they were listening to a sound only they could hear. Training was equal parts science and superstition. The first lesson was always about breath, not the dramatic held breath of movies, but the slow tide of air, made small and even. They learned to shape the throat so that the inhale and exhale balanced, to let the lungs rise without moving the shoulders, to relax the tongue because tension there echoes through the body. They practiced on gravel and carpet, and tile, and old wood and polished concrete, and wet grass that wanted to squeak if a shoe slid wrong. They practiced in socks with rice sewn into the toes so that any misstep would crunch a warning. They practiced in boots weighed with small bells that punished sloppy footwork. They practiced on Jonas' grandmother floor, the infamous creaky boards that had woken generations of children sneaking cookies, until they could cross the hallway without stirring the cat asleep by the radiator. There were lessons about laughter and tears too, because the body sabotages silence when emotion hits. Rook learned to bury a cough by yawning behind closed lips so the air shifted without turbulence. Nadia mastered the difficult trick of inhaling a sneeze into a softer reflex, a shimmer through the face that seemed to tremble out of existence. Jonas taught them the steadiness that comes from framing fear like a puzzle. When a drone light skimmed a window, he would think not of discovery but of geometry, the arc the light made and the way his shadow could be hidden in the shadow of a chair. They turned anxiety into arithmetic and the physics of sound into an internal map. Humor kept them human. One week an instructor lined the training hall with pans and metal lids like a thrift store had exploded on the floor. The assignment was to cross from one end to the other without ringing anything. Nadia completed it only after she discovered that if she hummed very softly at a pitch that matched the air in the hall, the pans seemed to forgive a faint nudge. Another time they held a contest to see who could carry a cup of seltzer from the kitchen to the sleeping quarters without releasing a single bubble. Rook cheated by drinking half, then gliding the rest like a waiter at a royal banquet. He won anyway because his steps were so soft the Fizz lay down and slept. They laughed about it for days because laughter, too, was trained. Let the body enjoy it when it was safe, then fold the joy away like a handkerchief when it was time to vanish. The Soundless squad practiced against technology with a zeal that bordered on affection. They learned what cameras saw and what microphones forgave, how most security systems were calibrated for intruders who tried to be quiet but were not quite. The team treated it as a conversation. A sensor asked a question, "Are you there?" and silence answered gently, not by shouting no but by speaking in the dialect the sensor did not understand. Jonas experimented with walking in resonance with the generator hum so that any stray scuff rode inside the drone of the machine and was not heard. Nadia became an expert at reading airflow. If a vent breathed a certain pattern, she would time her steps to the ventilation, letting the sigh of air hide the smallest crunch. Rook took ownership of doorways, studying hinges like a locksmith and discovering that pressing a panel just so would lift the weight from the pin and stop the tiny cry of protest that doors give when asked to move. By the time the aliens arrived in orbit, the squad had turned their craft into a culture. The new threat made governments frantic. Councils formed, weapons rattled, panic had a busy month. The squad kept training. They collected audio signatures of alien drones and studied the way the machines pivoted. They learned that the patrols trusted sound more than sight because their eyes were meant for starlight, and their ears measured pressure in a way Earth ears did not. That was when the idea of making silence into misdirection became strategy. They would not only avoid sound. They would gift false sound to the enemy, lay trails of whispers that led nowhere, fold a camp into a chorus that drowned out what mattered. The first step into alien territory was taken on a night when the rain had ended and the wet leaves were turned to mirrors. The squad approached across a cut field where the stubble wanted to crunch, but dampness softened the stems. They carried little. Weight made noise in unexpected ways, pulling the body off balance, jolting the feet into betrayal. Jonas had only the essentials and a small coil of wire that he could place against a link fence to stop it singing when touched. Nadia had a pouch of smooth stones she had selected for tone, each a different voice if tapped or tossed. Rook had tools and his patience, and the memory of the path he had mapped in daylight with a camera drone that never came closer than a ridge away. They reached the perimeter where a tower stood with a lens that blinked, hunting warmth. The aliens trusted their sound mapping more than their eyes, but they believed in redundancy, and they were not fools. The lens sought movement and thermal bloom. The squad let their bodies cool, not to a dangerous point but to a steady lower cadence, and they flattened into the tall grasses until the machine grew bored and looked elsewhere. Jonas counted in his head not numbers but steady breaths, the metronome of the night, and on the 8th exhale he led them forward. The alien camp grew restless as the night wore on. Mockery had turned into routine, soldiers pacing, sensors humming, and the commander strutting as if the very ground bent in reverence. Yet beneath the familiar chatter there was a new hum, a sharper resonance that had not been there earlier. The aliens called it the echo grid, a lattice of sound mapping rods that spun invisible waves through the camp. It was their latest invention, a technology designed to ensure that nothing with mass or motion could pass unnoticed. The commander gloated as he demonstrated it, telling his soldiers that even the smallest insect could be heard stepping on a leaf within 50 meters. The soldiers roared their approval, banging their claws against the dirt in rhythm. It was meant to seal their sense of invulnerability. For the Soundless squad, it was the beginning of a different kind of game. Jonas Hale crouched behind a stack of alien supply crates, eyes narrowed as he studied the shimmer in the air where the rods pulsed. He had spent his life breaking down the world into pieces of information, and this was no different. The echo grid was clever, yes, but it was also loud in its own way. It made a constant hum that filled the air like a mosquito whine. Jonas could already tell it was overly sensitive, a system that trusted its own perfection too much. Perfect systems were brittle. All they needed was one carefully placed fracture. Nadia had already begun experimenting. She plucked a small pebble from her pouch and rolled it across the dirt at a diagonal angle. The pebble clicked once, bounced lightly, and came to rest. Immediately one of the rods blinked, registering movement. But instead of closing down the camp, the system adjusted itself, shifting its grid lines as though correcting for a flaw. Nadia's eyes lit up as she realized the pattern. Every false sound did not merely distract the system. It forced the system to rewrite its map. In its effort to be perfect, the echo grid actually created blind spots. Rook leaned closer, his large frame hidden entirely by shadow, and let out a breath that almost counted as a laugh. It was like watching a proud guard dog chase its own tail. The squad began their careful dance with the technology. Jonas tested the edges, timing his footsteps with the moments when the grid pulsed at its peak volume. Nadia threw pebbles at intervals, forcing the machine to bend its attention toward phantom disturbances. Rook pressed his palm against the dirt, waiting, then placed a heavy stone just far enough away to make the ground vibrate in uneven rhythms. The machine responded with eager precision, lighting up in the wrong places while the squad drifted through its blind side. It was a duel of wits, and the humans were enjoying it more than they cared to admit. Their fun nearly ended when Rook almost sneezed. The air in the camp carried a sharp chemical tang, some alien lubricant or fuel that irritated the back of his throat. His nose twitched, his eyes watered, and for one horrifying moment Jonas thought the mission would unravel because of something as ridiculous as a sneeze. But Rook, disciplined in ways that belied his massive frame, pressed a fist against the bridge of his nose and shifted the impulse into a slow exhale through his teeth. The urge passed, though his face turned red with effort. Nadia shot him a look that was half amusement, half scolding, and he answered with the smallest shrug. Silence had been preserved, but the reminder was clear. They were human, not machines. One slip was all it would take. The aliens grew confident with their new toy. Soldiers gathered around the commander, who explained with great pride that humans would never be able to fool such technology. He told stories of past hunts, how humans had tripped over their own shadows, how they panicked when confronted with alien surveillance. The laughter carried again, this time bolstered by the belief that they were now untouchable. Jonas listened, every word sharpening his resolve. They had no idea their new invention was already being used against them, twisted into a weakness that would soon betray them. Nadia signaled that she wanted to move closer to the commander's tent. Jonas nodded, and the three of them slipped through the camp's arteries like shadows carried on wind. They timed their movements with the laughter, each eruption of noise masking the faintest scrape of cloth or the shuffle of dirt. The echo grid sang its song, but it was listening in the wrong direction. By the time they reached the edge of the central fire, they were already inside the camp's beating heart. From their vantage point they could see more of the alien defenses. Small drones hovered above the firelight, their sensors scanning, their rotors emitting a faint hum. The squad had anticipated this. Earlier in training, they had practiced against mechanical bees, tiny drones designed to buzz unpredictably. Rook reached into his pocket and pulled out a small foil strip that caught the firelight just enough to shimmer. He flicked it into the air. The drones instantly adjusted, drifting toward the reflection, curious and distracted. It was almost insulting how easy it was. The night after their first deep infiltration carried with it a strange energy. Jonas and his squad had returned to their hidden shelter, a collapsed barn on the far side of the valley, and none of them spoke for a long while. Silence was their craft, but silence here was heavy with meaning. They had seen enough inside the camp to know that the mockery of humans was only a mask. The aliens were not satisfied with laughter. They wanted ownership, domination disguised as comedy, and that made the situation far darker than any of them had imagined at the start. Jonas sat with his back against the splintered beam, staring at the faint glow of the alien camp in the distance. His jaw was tight, his thoughts racing faster than he wanted them to. Nadia finally broke the quiet, though even her words were hushed. She said she had seen the maps, that every major city on Earth was marked, not for destruction but for something worse. She described the banners, the floats, the diagrams of stages built on top of familiar landmarks. To the aliens it would look like a traveling carnival. To humans it would be a humiliation that disguised the slow replacement of authority with alien rule. Jonas felt a coldness settle in his chest as she spoke. Laughter was not harmless when it came from conquerors. It was another weapon, sharper than blades, because it bent dignity until it broke. Rook listened with a frown that deepened as the details came out. He said nothing for a while, then admitted he had seen something even stranger. While the commander mocked humans for being weak, he had glimpsed a second set of documents. These were not about parades or shows. They were about containment. The words had been written in alien script, but Rook had recognized the diagrams easily enough. They were cages, habitats designed for display. A human zoo. The thought of it left them all grim. To be mocked was one thing, to be collected like trophies was another. The discovery planted a seed of anger in the squad, but anger could not be allowed to control them. Silence and precision demanded discipline. Jonas reminded them that the mission was to gather information, not to lash out. Yet even as he said it, he knew the balance was shifting. If the aliens succeeded, stealth would no longer be enough. They would need to turn silence into sabotage, into resistance. He felt the responsibility pressing down on him like the weight of the night. The following evening they moved again. The alien camp looked the same from a distance, soldiers laughing, technology humming, but the squad now carried sharper eyes. They slipped into the perimeter, following the paths they had mapped earlier, using the blind spots of the echo grid to their advantage. This time they pushed deeper, aiming not just to study but to uncover secrets that might change the course of the conflict. Their steps were soundless, their breaths measured, their hearts steady. Yet beneath their calm, the fire of what they had seen burned. Inside the command tent they found the truth laid bare. The commander stood with a small circle of elite soldiers, pointing at holograms projected in pale blue light. The parade routes glowed across continents, shimmering lines from city to city. At each endpoint were icons that looked like great arenas. Jonas realized these were not celebrations at all. They were staging grounds, bases that would grow under the mask of entertainment. As crowds laughed at alien caricatures, troops would assemble behind the scenes, supplies would flow in plain sight, and resistance would be laughed into silence. The brilliance of it was terrifying. Jonas shifted his gaze toward the commander and studied him carefully. This was not just a soldier boasting to his men. The commander was clever, too clever. His mockery of humans was not simply arrogance but part of the larger plan. Every time he encouraged his soldiers to laugh at humanity, he made them underestimate their enemy. Every sneer, every exaggerated pantomime of human failure, was fuel for the belief that conquest would be easy. It was psychological warfare disguised as humor. Jonas clenched his teeth. To fight this enemy would mean turning their own weapon back on them. The camp was alive with noise when the Soundless squad returned, but this time they did not come as observers. They came as saboteurs. The laughter of the alien soldiers rose high and careless, filling the air with mockery that rolled like waves across the clearing. It was the very arrogance Jonas had expected. Their confidence had only grown after the installation of the echo grid. The commander paraded through the camp boasting that humans were little more than stumbling shadows, predictable prey waiting to be rounded up for display. He had no idea the humans he insulted were already weaving through his soldiers, every step dismantling his victory before it even began. Jonas watched the lights shimmer across the alien tents and felt the cold purpose settle in. Tonight's silence would not simply protect them. Tonight's silence would strike. They began at the perimeter. Nadia moved first, darting to the outermost rod of the echo grid. The machine pulsed with its steady rhythm, a hum that pressed into the teeth. She knelt in the shadow of a supply crate and withdrew a fine strand of wire coated in wax. With practiced fingers, she looped the wire around the base of the rod and tied it to a nearby drainage pipe. Each time the wind shifted, the pipe vibrated, creating a false reading that rippled across the grid. Within moments, the rod was convinced the disturbance was constant. Its program adapted, ignoring the signal as harmless background noise. One eye of the network had been blinded. She melted back into the dark, her satisfaction hidden behind her calm expression. Rook's task required more brute creativity. He slipped toward the generator that powered a cluster of drones. The machine throbbed with energy, alien metal glowing faintly along its seams. Rook pressed a small device against the casing, a patch wrapped in insulation and foam. When he activated it, the device sent out vibrations tuned to the generator's own pulse. It was like teaching the machine to hum to itself. The generator accepted the false rhythm, overloading its stabilizers. Within minutes it began to cough, its hum faltering into irregular sputters. Above, the drones wobbled uncertainly, their patterns breaking into stutters. Two crashed quietly into the dirt beyond the firelight. No one noticed over the sound of laughter. Jonas moved toward the command sector. He knew this part carried the highest risk. The commander's tent was ringed with guards, their rifles slung casually, their attention more on the performance of their comrades than on their duty. The guards laughed as another soldier exaggerated a human crawl, dragging his body across the dirt with ridiculous slowness. Jonas used that very spectacle to slip closer. Each roar of laughter drowned his movements, every cheer disguised the faint displacement of air as he crept forward. Inside the tent he found the console that linked the echo grid. Its screen shimmered with waves and dots, pulsing with sound signatures. Jonas studied it quickly. The system was brilliant, but it had been designed with arrogance. It assumed its operators would never imagine a ghost that lived inside the noise. He tapped a small device from his pack against the side of the console. It carried no explosives, only a feedback coil. Once activated, it would create subtle echoes inside the system, reflections bouncing endlessly until the grid was flooded with phantom signals. The brilliance of the network would drown in its own perfection. Jonas armed the device and slipped away, his heart pounding as he slid past the guards who still laughed at the clownish mimicry of humans. By the time the squad regrouped at the far side of the camp, the first signs of sabotage were beginning to bloom. The drones buzzed weakly, their sensors blinking in confusion. The rods of the echo grid flickered uncertainly, some turning blind while others saw ghosts in every shadow. The guards muttered, glancing around, unsure if they were being watched. The commander shouted angrily for order, insisting the systems were flawless. His words rang hollow as alarms blinked inconsistently, warning of intruders in places where no one stood. Soldiers scrambled in circles, chasing phantoms, pointing rifles into empty darkness. The squad watched from only yards away, concealed perfectly, their faces steady masks of patience. Nadia was the first to notice the shift in tone. The laughter was fading. It was being replaced by confusion, irritation, and the sharp edge of fear. The more the commander shouted, the more his soldiers faltered. Rook leaned close to Jonas, whispering so softly it was no louder than breath, that the moment was coming. Jonas nodded. They had not only crippled the machines. They had infected the soldiers with doubt. The noise of mockery had become noise of disorder. Silence was winning. The sabotage spread quickly. One of the rods, its readings overloaded by the feedback coil, began to spark. The light drew attention, and when an alien soldier reached to steady it, the rod collapsed in his arms with a hiss of steam. Panic spread. Another soldier shouted that humans must be inside the camp. The commander bellowed that such a thing was impossible, that the grid would have revealed them. His denial only deepened the cracks. More soldiers shouted. Some fired rifles into the dark, beams of energy flashing harmlessly across empty tents. The Soundless squad did not move. They let the enemy's paranoia do the work. When the moment was right, Jonas gave a signal. It was not a word but a slight tilt of his head. The three of them rose as one, stepping into the open space of the campfire's edge. For a heartbeat the aliens did not see them. The disbelief was too great. When finally eyes registered their presence, shock spread like fire. Three humans stood where no human should be, silent, calm, steady. Not one had been noticed until they chose to reveal themselves. The commander's face twisted in rage. He roared that it was a trick, that they had used witchcraft or machines. But the truth was undeniable. The Soundless squad had walked through their defenses, sabotaged their machines, and stood now at the center of the camp with the kind of poise that mocked the very mockery they had endured. The soldiers froze, their claws tightening on their rifles but their courage faltering under the weight of the impossible. Jonas spoke then, his voice low but carrying in the silence that followed the breakdown of laughter. He told them that humans were not the clumsy shadows they had pretended. He told them that silence had teeth, and tonight it had bitten. Dawn came as a washed-out gray that set the valley shivering, and with it came the change the Soundless squad had expected. The alien camp did not laugh anymore. It bristled. Guards moved in sharp lines, drones hovered in tight formations, and in the center of it all the commander stood beside a device that looked like a nest of spears fused into a gleaming ring. He rested one claw on its rim with a pride that dared the world to challenge him. The Echo Grid, he announced in a voice that cut through the air like ice, had been a prototype. This was the field, a weapon that did not listen for sound but crushed it. When activated, it would saturate the camp in ultrasonic pressure until every vibration was pinned to the ground. Stealth would be ended by physics. Silence would be the first casualty. His soldiers cheered, relief brightening their faces, and for a moment the commander let himself smile. He had his certainty back. Jonas watched from the low shadow of a storage sled and felt the old calm pool inside him. Certainty, he had learned, was always a hinge. Push at it, and doors opened. He signaled to Nadia and Rook with the smallest turns of his fingers. The plan they had rehearsed through the night had 3 steps. Survive the field, bend it, break it. Survive required preparation. They had threaded microfiber lines through the seams of their suits to create a web that stiffened under pressure and kept the worst of the sonic wave from collapsing their lungs. Bend required misdirection. Break required help. He glanced across the camp to the small figure standing apart from the crowd, the young alien who had left the data rod in the dirt 2 nights before. The soldier stood rigid, eyes fixed on the device as if watching a storm gather. Jonas held his gaze in memory for a heartbeat, and then let it go. There would be only seconds between the opening move and the end. The commander raised his hand and the ring spat light that looked like no light at all, a shimmer of air that made the ground quiver. The first pulse rolled out. Jonas felt it in his teeth and in the soft place behind his eyes. The world lost its edges. The campfire ashes shivered like a swarm of flies. Nadia closed her eyes and set her breath into the rhythm they had practiced, not resisting the wave but riding it, allowing her body to become a reed in current. Rook planted his feet and let the suit web tighten against his ribs. The second pulse came harder. Tents thrummed, poles sang, and the closest drones jittered wildly as their stabilizers went blind. A soldier laughed, not in mockery now but in a brittle joy that said, "Finally we are safe." Jonas counted to 3 and moved. They had to cross a strip of open ground to reach the field generator. Under normal sound the distance would have been simple. Under the weapon it became a gauntlet. Every step threatened to shout their presence. The trick was not to step at all, at least not as the field expected. Jonas shifted his weight along the microfiber web so that his mass slid more than fell, transferring motion through the suit like water passes through reeds. Nadia used the hum to time her progress, letting the high peaks lift her soles a fraction before she set them down. Rook went last, his size a liability until he turned it into an anchor, absorbing the pulse like a cliff takes the ocean. They moved as one slow current. Their bodies learned a new grammar and spoke it with care. The ring flared again and the commander threw his arms wide, declaring that even ghosts would now have a footprint. As if answering the boast, a small figure detached from the guard line and began walking toward the generator with an ordinary stride. For one strange moment it looked like rank disobedience. Jonas froze. The young alien did not look at anyone. He looked only at the ring. Then he reached to his collar and tugged free a disc, a personal dampener the soldiers wore to protect against feedback, and snapped it into two pieces with a decisive twist. The halves fell, and the field caught them, bouncing them in place like coins on a drum. The soldier leaned close to the generator plate as if listening to a heartbeat, and adjusted a dial hidden under the rim. The note of the field shifted by a hair. Jonas felt the difference like a change in weather. A narrow valley opened in the pressure, a path as long as a breath. Nadia slid into it without thought. Rook followed. The ally had made his choice. They reached the outer spokes of the ring, where slender veins sang with the power rushing through them. Up close the device was not elegant. It was angry. It stamped on the air again and again. Nadia knelt at a joint she had identified in their planning, where the power split into quadrants. She produced a coil of wire so fine it looked like hair and hooked it to two contact points. The wire was not meant to short the system. That would have screamed. It was meant to confuse phase, to make the ring argue with itself. Rook steadied her by cupping a hand under her elbow and absorbing a pulse that would have knocked her tools from her fingers. Jonas found the black spine at the base, a panel with a strange satin sheen. He pressed a palm there and felt the device breathe. He had touched enough engines to know how they wished to be treated. He whispered without sound in the language of pressure and pulse and felt the panel let go. It was a trick, part physics and part respect, the way a door opens when you move it the way it wants to swing. Inside the spine the circuits were simple in shape but heavy with power. The device did not bother with elegance because it assumed coercion would suffice. Jonas placed a tiny wedge between two couplers, then eased them apart by a fingernail. The field hiccuped. Soldiers flinched. The commander snarled and slammed a lever forward. The ring roared. Air clamped. A drone shattered like glass made of sound. Jonas' teeth sang with pain. Nadia threw the last loop of her phase wire and tugged. The note of the field split into a chord. Rook leaned in and braced both hands against the support strut. The pulse slammed into him and he grunted, not in fear but in annoyance, like a weightlifter correcting a sloppy bar. Across the clearing the young alien stepped back from the ring with deliberate slowness, as if what he had done were nothing at all. The commander saw him then, and something like wary comprehension crossed his features. There was no time for acknowledgement. The field began to eat itself. It was a soft failing at first, like a singer losing pitch. Then the ring flared a final time and the cord broke apart into a rain of frequencies that skittered harmlessly over the dirt. The world took a deep breath. Leaves swayed. Tent ropes relaxed. The camp made its first natural sound in minutes, the ordinary creak of canvas, the faint rattle of cookware, the small murmurs of relieved bodies. Silence opened under the noise like a stage door. Jonas stepped through. He rose to his full height and the squad rose with him. In that moment the performance the aliens had planned for humanity reversed itself. The audience became the actors. 3 humans stood inside the enemy's crown jewel, and the jewel had gone dull.